Venezuela's opposition leader is reportedly gearing up for a fresh push to oust President Nicolas Maduro from power. Juan Guaido has called on supporters to join him for a dry run of what he calls Exercise Operation Freedom on Saturday. Maduro and Guaido have been locked in a standoff since January, when Guaido proclaimed himself interim leader. Maduro was re-elected in May 2018 in a vote that critics said was rigged. The domestic rivalry quickly turned international, with various countries taking sides. Russia, which backs Maduro's government, has sent a small contingent of troops to Venezuela. U.S. President Donald Trump, whose administration backs Guaido, has vowed that all options are on the table and has ordered Russia to get out. China, meanwhile, has consistently pressed for a political solution through peaceful dialogue. What impact might this exercise Operation Freedom have on Venezuela, and what's at stake for the U.S., Russia and China? Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio is Sebastian Naranjo Rodriguez, researcher at the Center for Latin American Studies at Renmin University, and from Shanghai, Professor Haibin, Deputy Director of the Center for American Studies at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So let me start asking you, Sebastian, Guaido has called on supporters to join this latest movement on Saturday. What would these freedom cells work? How would they work against Maduro's loyal military?
The first thing to point out is this is a process. It's a drill that will commence on April 6th and will encompass 5 different parts. So what the Guaido government is trying to do is have volunteers, the military, and civil society, as well as the public administration, in on this. So what we need to understand is also, how is the military still loyal to Maduro? And this has to do with their control of economic capabilities. Now, what the Guaido government needs to, well, the Guaido opposition needs to do is try to negotiate with the military, not just amnesty like they have done before, but also touch upon their economic interests, and only then can they be able to find some compromise.
Professor New, do you think that's the only way to incentivize the military to come to the table?
I think the military is a key factor to influence the future of the Venezuela's political deadlock. But there are also other factors. I think the most important thing currently in Venezuela, all sides need some kind of trust of each other, because the deeply distrust among them prevent fruitful dialogue or negotiation. So now they focus on a more confrontational approach, which is very bad for the country facing such kind of deeper political, economic, and humanitarian crisis.
Sebastian, there's obviously not a lot of trust because Maduro has put his country's army on high alert, even claiming the opposition is trying to assassinate him. How do you expect Maduro and his faction to respond to this dry run, this nationwide movement?
Maduro so far has been working very closely with the High Commission and his military. Many say he hasn't spent a lot of time in Miraflores, which is the presidential palace, but has been in very close conversations with not just Venezuelan intelligence and military, but also with the G2, which is the Cuban intelligence agency. So of course, he probably has threats coming in from different sides. Nonetheless, while April 6th and the following movements take place, he's consolidating power and trying to continue with a strong electoral and support base, usually in the lower ranks, as well as building these communes inside these sectors of society that support him, so that he's ready whenever the opposition decides to take major action.
Professor New, as the months tick by, I mean, it's been 3 months already, is Maduro losing support and Guaido gaining support? And, what's the situation in South America?
In South America, I think there is a divided position among the regional countries. And members of the Lima group, they support Guaido. But Mexico, as a traditional Latin American major country, it supported the Maduro administration. So I think from the regional countries' perspective, they hope the country to restore democracy, but through dialogue, the political dialogue means, rather than the military intervention. So currently, I think most of the regional countries are following the U.S. leadership to push economic sanctions on the Maduro regime, but they refuse to follow an approach of military intervention. So I think currently the regional countries are lacking the traditional role to push both sides from the Venezuela to have an effective dialogue. I think this is a pity for the region.
Sebastian, you were telling me that it's not necessarily that Guaido is losing support, but there's an asymmetry going on.
Yes. Internally, inside Venezuela, as time passes, Guaido's supporters are weakened. They have less food. Now they have electricity electricity shutdowns, a blackout, sorry. So as time passes for Guaido, he loses support internally. Nonetheless, internationally, Maduro loses legitimacy. And so for him, internally and nationally, time works in his advantage. But internationally, it works to his disadvantage, making Guaido more popular and gaining more support, in the international community. Now we have the United Nations entering. The Red Cross has now sent humanitarian aid. We also have, of course, more participation from international organizations, and the United Nations seems to be taking a more, or at least plans to take a more active role in this issue, which so far has stayed away from.
What do you think of the U.S.'s role so far, Professor New? Obviously, with the sanctions and now the embargo in a couple of weeks, but right now there are no signs of military intervention, right?
Yes, the United States is trying to put more pressure on the Maduro regime, not only from the economic perspective, economic sanctions, but also build diplomatic coalitions to press the domestic change. But now, I think because of the domestic confrontation between the Maduro government and Guaido, so the international efforts cannot bring real change in Venezuela. Like the humanitarian aid from the U.S., from Brazil, was prevented by the Maduro government because the aid was directly was supposed to send to Guaido administration. So this kind of things there is a very negative engagement between the U.S. and Venezuela. So this unilateral approach cannot achieve its goal. So from my perspective, I think international community shall encourage more constructive political dialogue or arrangement to bring the domestic political forces of Venezuela to rebuild the constitutional order of the country rather than to struggle for the military support.
Sebastian, we were chatting earlier and you were saying that you think this will be resolved this year and it would be at, say, a UN level.
Well, what I was trying to say was, before, we used to believe the conflict would be resolved very quickly. Nonetheless, momentum has slowed down. As Professor mentioned, there were a few shortfalls for the president of Guaido when he tried to enter humanitarian aid. Nonetheless, the movement still continues, and it's not sustainable for the countries in the region to be taking all the refugees and all the people that are fleeing Venezuela. We have countries like Colombia, Brazil, who are taking thousands of people every day. Therefore, this crisis is not sustainable. We would like this conflict to be resolved sooner rather than later. Nonetheless, in my research and from what I've heard, it appears like things will be, if not solved, there will be a few solutions on the table this year.
Professor New, let's talk about Russia's role in this. I mean, they've sent a small contingent of troops, which they say is for maintenance of aircraft, but we know they're close partners, Russia and Venezuela. So is it about the gas fields? Is it about keeping U.S. power in check in South America?
Yes, Russia is the main ally of Venezuela, and it has invested heavily in the oil sector, and also has some arms sales with Maduro regime. So they have Russia has a very strategic interest in Venezuela's presence, and considering the global competition between the United States and Russia in Middle East, in Central Asia, in Europe, so Latin America, especially Venezuela, is a new battlefield for both countries to compete for influence.
Do you see that, Sebastian, that this is a proxy confrontation that is being fought in Venezuela while this humanitarian tragedy continues?
Well, so far, no country has deployed any troops to the country. We've had some specialists, Russian specialists, that have gone to do some maintenance and fix some equipment that was damaged during the electricity blackouts. We've also had the U.S. saying that all options are on the table. Nonetheless, a military confrontation or a confrontation between Russia and the U.S. would be incredibly expensive. To take as a point of comparison, interventions in the Middle East, such as Iraq, where costed the U.S. government trillions of dollars. Venezuela is a much larger country, is very different. It's a completely different situation. Therefore, at the moment, in addition to all of this, relations between the U.S. and Russia have improved after the Helsinki summit. Therefore, having a proxy...
Okay, we're going to have to end it there, I'm afraid. I wish we could touch upon many other points, but thank you so much, Sebastian Naranjo, Rodriguez, researcher at the Center for Latin American Studies at Renmin University, and from Shanghai, Professor Haibin, Deputy Director of the Center for American Studies at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies. That's all for this edition of The Point.